I never really believed in the idea that something could follow you home. Not ghosts or curses or anything like that. I always thought those were just stories people told themselves when something strange happened and they needed an explanation. But about 2 years ago, something happened to me that still makes me uneasy whenever I drive at night. Even now, when I'm on a quiet road and I see headlights behind me that seem to stay just a little too close for too long, I can't help but think about that night. It happened in late October of 2023. I was living in a small town just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing special about the place. Quiet neighborhoods, a couple of grocery stores, a gas station that stayed open 24 hours, and a long stretch of two-lane highway that connected our town to the nearest city. I worked late shifts back then at a warehouse, usually getting off around 11:30 at night. The drive home took about 20 minutes, and most nights the roads were almost completely empty. That night started like any other. I clocked out, got into my car, and started the drive home. The weather had turned cold earlier that week, and the air had that damp fall feeling where everything smells like leaves and rain. I remember the radio was playing quietly, and I was already thinking about getting home and going to sleep. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights appear behind me. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes another late worker would be on the same road heading home. At first, the car stayed a normal distance back, maybe a few hundred feet, but after a couple of minutes, I noticed it slowly getting closer, close enough that the headlights were filling my rearview mirror. I figured maybe the driver just wanted to go faster than I was, so I eased off the gas a little to give them space to pass, but they didn't pass. They stayed directly behind me. When the road curved, the headlights stayed right there. When I slowed down a little more, they slowed too. I tried not to think much about it at first. Some people just drive like that. But then something else caught my attention. Every time we passed under a streetlight, I tried to glance in my mirror to see the car behind me, but the driver kept their distance just far enough that the streetlight never really illuminated the front of their car. It was just two bright headlights and a dark shape behind them. The road eventually splits into two directions. One continues toward the highway, and the other leads into my neighborhood. Most people heading toward the city stay on the highway road. I turned toward my neighborhood, assuming the car behind me would continue straight. But when I checked the mirror again, the headlights turned with me. That's when the first real feeling of unease started creeping in. My neighborhood wasn't large, just a handful of streets and a few cul-de-sacs. The kind of place where everyone goes home around the same time, every night. I tried to convince myself maybe the driver lived nearby too. But the strange thing was that as soon as I turned onto the residential road, the car behind me got even closer. Close enough that the headlights were reflecting off the inside of my car. I remember adjusting my mirror because the brightness was starting to hurt my eyes. My house was about 3 turns away at that point, and suddenly I didn't want to go straight home anymore. Something about the way that car stayed so perfectly behind me felt wrong. So instead of turning onto my street, I drove past it. The car behind me followed. I made another turn. They followed again. At that point, my heart started beating a little faster. I told myself maybe I was just being paranoid, but I decided to test it. I made a random turn down a street that looped around the park near our neighborhood. Almost nobody drove through there at night. The headlights followed me again. Now there was no doubt in my mind. Whoever was behind me was following me. I tried to see the car more clearly, but it stayed just far enough back that I couldn't make out details. It looked like a dark SUV, or maybe a large sedan, but the windows looked almost completely black. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling someone. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That someone was driving behind me? That didn't exactly sound like an emergency. So instead, I kept driving, circling through the neighborhood streets. The car stayed behind me the entire time. After about 5 minutes of this, I noticed something that made the situation even worse. The headlights suddenly turned off. At first, I thought the driver had finally left, but when I checked the mirror, I could still see the faint outline of the car following me in the darkness. They had turned off their lights completely. That was the moment I realized something was seriously wrong. Nobody drives through dark residential streets with their headlights off unless they're trying not to be seen. I felt a sudden rush of panic. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were starting to ache. I pressed the gas and started heading toward the main road again. The car behind me sped up too, still with its lights off. When I reached the main intersection near the gas station, I made a quick turn into the brightly lit parking lot. The gas station was open, and there were two other cars parked near the entrance. As soon as my car entered the light, the headlights behind me suddenly turned back on. The car slowed slightly as it pulled into the lot behind me. I parked near the front door of the store and stayed inside my car. The other vehicle stopped about 3 spaces away. For a moment, nothing happened. I kept staring at the car through my mirror, trying to see the driver. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see anything inside. About 30 seconds passed like that. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall and wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head. Even under the gas station lights, I couldn't see his face clearly. He stood beside the car for a moment, just looking in my direction. Something about the way he stood there felt incredibly unsettling. He didn't move toward the store. He didn't look around the parking lot. He was just watching my car. My instinct told me not to get out. I quickly locked the doors and grabbed my phone. The moment he started walking toward me, I dialed 911. As the phone rang, the man stopped about 10 feet from my car. He stood there silently, staring at the windshield. I tried not to look directly at him, but I could feel his eyes on me. The dispatcher answered, and I started explaining what was happening as calmly as I could. As soon as the man realized I was on the phone, his posture changed slightly. He turned his head toward the store entrance, then back toward my car. For a second, I thought he might try to open the door, but instead, he slowly backed away. He walked back to his car, got inside, and started the engine. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher as his car pulled out of the gas station lot and drove away. The police arrived about 10 minutes later and took a report, but they never found the car. I went home that night feeling shaken, but relieved that nothing worse had happened. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe the guy thought he knew me. Maybe he was confused about directions. But about a week later, something happened that made me realize it probably wasn't coincidence at all. I walked outside one morning to go to work and noticed something sitting on the windshield of my car. It was a small folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade. At first, I thought it might be a parking notice or something from a neighbor. But when I unfolded it, there were only 3 words written on the paper: "You should have stopped." I never saw that car again after that, and the police never found out who left the note. I ended up moving out of that neighborhood a few months later. Even now, whenever I drive late at night and see headlights behind me that don't seem to pass, I start checking my mirrors a little more carefully than I used to. Because once you've had the feeling that someone might be following you for real, it never completely goes away. I've always been the type of person who doesn't scare easily. Growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, my friends and I used to explore abandoned places all the time. Old barns, empty houses, closed factories, whatever we could find. Nothing ever really happened. At worst, we'd hear a raccoon or a loose board creaking in the wind. So when something strange actually did happen to me a couple years ago, it took a while before I even realized how serious the situation was. Looking back now, I'm pretty sure I got lucky that night. Because if things had gone just a little differently, I probably wouldn't be here telling the story. This happened in the summer of 2022 when I was living in a small apartment outside of Des Moines, Iowa. I worked part-time delivering food for one of those delivery apps while I was finishing college. Most of the time, it was easy money, just picking up orders from restaurants and dropping them off at houses or apartment complexes. But sometimes you'd get deliveries that were a little weird. This one started with a late-night order that came through on my phone around 12:40 a.m. It was from a diner on the edge of town that stayed open all night. The delivery address was about 15 minutes away, out near the rural area where the houses were spaced far apart, and the roads didn't have many streetlights. Normally, I didn't like accepting orders that far out, but the pay was good, and it had been a slow night, so I accepted it. I picked up the food, got in my car, and started driving toward the address. The route took me through a long stretch of 2-lane roads surrounded by farmland. At night, it's incredibly dark out there. The only light comes from your headlights and the occasional farmhouse window in the distance. About 10 minutes into the drive, my GPS told me to turn onto a narrow gravel road. That part didn't surprise me. A lot of the houses out there had long private roads leading up to them. But as soon as my car turned onto the gravel, something felt off. The road was rough and uneven, and tall trees lined both sides of it, blocking most of the moonlight. My headlights barely reached beyond the next curve. I kept driving slowly, following the GPS. After about half a mile, the road opened up into a clearing. According to the map, the house should have been right in front of me, but there was no house, just an empty dirt clearing surrounded by trees. I slowed the car to a stop and checked my phone again. The GPS still showed the delivery pin directly on my location. I looked around, expecting to see a driveway or maybe a mailbox somewhere nearby, but there was nothing, just the trees and the gravel road behind me. I figured the GPS might be slightly off, so I drove a little farther forward. The clearing ended about 30 feet ahead, turning back into thick woods. There definitely wasn't a house there. I grabbed my phone and opened the delivery app to message the customer. Before I could type anything, my phone buzzed with a message from them. It said, "You're here." That confused me even more. I looked around again, trying to see if maybe someone was standing outside or if there was a hidden driveway I missed, but the clearing was completely empty. I replied, "I'm at the location, but I don't see a house." A few seconds passed. Then another message popped up. "Get out of the car." I stared at the screen for a second, thinking maybe it was a joke. I typed back, "Where should I leave the food?" The typing indicator appeared for a moment. Then the next message came through. "Just step out, I'm right here." That's when the uneasy feeling started creeping in. I slowly looked around again, scanning the tree line. The headlights lit up the clearing in front of my car, but everything beyond that was pitch black. I couldn't see anyone. I stayed in the driver's seat and didn't respond. About 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message said, "I can see you." The words made my stomach drop a little. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield toward the trees. At first, I didn't notice anything. Then I saw movement. Just a slight shift of something dark between two trees at the edge of the clearing. I squinted, trying to focus on it. For a moment, it looked like a person standing there, completely still, half hidden in the darkness. My heart started beating faster. Whoever it was hadn't come any closer. They were just standing there watching my car. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from the customer, "Bring the food over here." I realized then that the delivery address probably wasn't real. Whoever ordered the food had intentionally sent me to that clearing, and they were waiting in the woods. I didn't know how many people were out there or what they wanted, but I knew I wasn't getting out of the car. I quickly put the car in reverse and started backing up toward the gravel road. As soon as the headlights shifted away from the trees, I saw something else move. Not just one figure this time. There were at least two more shapes stepping out from deeper in the woods. They had been standing farther back where my headlights couldn't reach. One of them started walking toward the clearing. That was enough for me. I hit the gas and sped back down the gravel road. My tires were kicking up rocks as the car bounced along the uneven surface. My phone kept buzzing with new messages, but I ignored them. I just focused on getting back to the main road. After about 30 seconds of driving, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw headlights turning onto the gravel road behind me, but the trees and dust made it hard to tell. When I finally reached the paved road again, I didn't slow down. I drove straight to the nearest gas station about 5 miles away and parked under the bright lights. Only then did I check my phone. There were 4 new messages from the customer. The first said, "Why are you leaving?" The second said, "You're almost here." The third message just said, "Don't worry." The last one made my skin crawl. It said, "We just wanted to talk." I canceled the delivery and reported the account through the app. I also called the police and told them what happened. They said they'd send someone out to check the area, but since I couldn't give an exact address, there wasn't much they could do. A few days later, I checked the delivery app again, out of curiosity. The account that placed the order had already been deleted. I stopped doing late-night deliveries after that because the more I thought about it, the more disturbing the whole situation seemed. Whoever those people were, they knew exactly how to get someone alone in the middle of nowhere. And if I had actually gotten out of the car when they told me to, I have a feeling the story would have ended very differently. I used to work the overnight shift at a small self-storage facility just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. It wasn't exactly the kind of job people imagine when they think of something creepy. Most nights were incredibly boring. My job was basically to sit in a small office near the front gate, watch the security cameras, and make sure nobody tried to break in or mess with the units. The facility had rows and rows of storage buildings, all separated by narrow driveways where people could pull their cars up to unload boxes and furniture. During the day, it was busy with customers coming and going, but at night, the place was completely empty. The owners kept someone there overnight because a few years earlier, there had been a string of break-ins around the city. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and after a couple of weeks, I got used to the silence. The office had a small desk, a cheap coffee machine, and a wall of monitors showing different camera angles around the property. Most of the time, nothing moved on those screens except the occasional stray cat wandering through the lot. The night something strange happened started like any other. It was around 2:15 in the morning. I remember because I had just microwaved a frozen burrito and was halfway through eating it while watching videos on my phone. The monitors were sitting just to my left, and every now and then I'd glance over them out of habit. That's when I noticed one of the cameras showing something unusual. The camera pointed toward one of the back rows of storage units, the part of the property farthest from the office. Normally those rows were completely dark, except for a single overhead security light. But on the screen I could see that one of the roll-up unit doors was open. At first I thought maybe I was mistaken. Sometimes shadows from the light could make it look like a door was slightly raised. But when I leaned closer to the monitor, it was obvious. The door was halfway open, and the inside of the unit was pitch black. That immediately caught my attention because the facility closed at 9 p.m., and customers couldn't access their units after that unless they had special permission. I checked the access log on the computer. The last person to enter the property had left around 8:40 p.m. No one had used the gate since then, which meant that door must have been opened from the inside of the property. I figured maybe someone had managed to sneak in before the gate closed and was trying to hide out until morning. That had happened once before, with a homeless guy who tried sleeping inside an empty unit. The manager told me that if I ever saw something like that, I should drive out in the golf cart and tell them to leave. So I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and stepped outside. The night air was warm and still, and the entire property was quiet. The only sound was the faint buzzing from the overhead lights. I got into the golf cart and started driving slowly down the narrow driveway between the rows of storage buildings. The farther I went from the office, the darker it got. The buildings blocked most of the light, leaving long shadows across the pavement. When I finally reached the row where the open unit was, I parked the cart about 20 feet away. The metal door was definitely halfway open. I stepped out of the cart and called out, "Hello? The facility is closed. If someone's in there, you need to leave." My voice echoed slightly between the metal walls of the storage buildings. There was no response. I walked a little closer, shining the flashlight toward the opening. The beam cut through the darkness inside the unit, illuminating a stack of cardboard boxes and an old wooden dresser pushed against the back wall. It looked like a normal storage unit, but there was no one inside. I stood there for a moment, confused. The door had clearly been opened, but the unit looked empty except for the stored items. I stepped closer and lifted the door the rest of the way so I could see inside better. That's when something on the floor caught my attention. There was a small folding chair sitting in the middle of the unit, facing the entrance. I was pretty sure that chair hadn't been there before. And sitting on the chair was a small portable radio, the kind people take camping. I walked a few steps into the unit and shined the flashlight directly at it. The radio was turned on, but the volume was extremely low, just barely audible static. That immediately gave me a weird feeling. Why would someone leave a chair and a radio in the middle of a storage unit facing the door? Before I could think about it too much, the radio suddenly clicked. The static stopped for a moment. Then a voice came through. It wasn't a broadcast. It sounded like someone speaking very quietly into a walkie-talkie. The voice said, "He's inside." I froze where I was standing. My first thought was that maybe someone was outside playing a prank, using the radio to mess with me. I turned around and shined the flashlight toward the driveway. No one was there. The golf cart was still sitting where I parked it. The rows of storage units stretched out in both directions, completely empty. The radio crackled again. The same voice spoke once more. This time it said, "Wait." My heart started pounding in my chest. I suddenly had the overwhelming feeling that someone nearby was watching me. I stepped backward out of the unit and looked around again, sweeping the flashlight across the dark spaces between the buildings. At first I didn't see anything. Then the beam of light passed across the roof of the storage row directly behind me, and that's when I noticed a silhouette. Someone was crouched up there, perfectly still, watching me. For a split second, my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. The person was lying flat against the roof of the storage building, almost blending into the darkness. The moment the flashlight beam landed on them, they moved. They quickly pulled themselves backward and disappeared over the edge of the roof. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I ran straight back to the golf cart and drove as fast as it would go toward the office. As I sped down the driveway, I glanced behind me once, and I swear I saw someone climbing down the side of one of the buildings in the distance. When I got back to the office, I locked the door and called the police immediately. They arrived about 15 minutes later and searched the entire facility. They found the open storage unit and the chair and radio exactly where I described them, but whoever had been on the roof was gone. The officers checked the fence line and eventually discovered a section of the back fence that had been cut open. Someone had clearly been sneaking in and out of the property. The part that still bothers me is that the radio they found inside the unit wasn't connected to any station. It had been modified to receive signals from a handheld transmitter, which means whoever was speaking through it was nearby while I was standing inside that storage unit, listening, watching, and waiting. I quit that job 2 weeks later, because the more I thought about it, the more disturbing the whole setup seemed. Whoever those people were, they didn't just happen to be there that night. They had placed that chair facing the door for a reason. And judging by the voice on the radio, they knew exactly when I stepped inside,